Welcome to this Crown 4 special, Selma to Ferguson, what has changed? I'm Pam Moore. We're here at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, and we're talking with a variety of guests about the lasting impact of past events, the current mood of the country when it comes to race, and what has and has not changed since that fateful day on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Sunday, March 7th, 1965, Selma. Hundreds of African Americans begin a march to Montgomery to press for equal voting rights. Later named Bloody Sunday, scores were beaten, trampled as white onlookers cheered. The chilling images seen on television enraged much of America. On March 9th, Dr. Martin Luther King walked to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but fearing even worse violence, instead of marching, kneeled to pray. Days later, with thousands of supporters, the march to Montgomery was a success, as the new movie Selma shows in vivid detail. Today, many say Bloody Sunday brings to mind the law enforcement response to Ferguson protests after police killed an unarmed Black Missouri teenager, Michael Brown, and no charges were filed. Our first guests, no strangers to pushing boundaries. Belva Davis, an icon in journalism, recognized locally and nationally. She was the first woman of color to report in broadcast news in the western United States. And former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, the longest-running Speaker of the California Assembly, continues to be a key point person in politics, strategizing and influencing San Francisco, the Bay Area, and California. I am so happy to be with you both to talk about Black History Month. We're looking at Selma. What are your remembrances? What do you remember about Bloody Sunday when that happened? And here, you weren't there that day, obviously, but what do you remember was the mood, the feeling when you had heard about Bloody Sunday?
I felt diminished as a person, because here were people that looked like me, my color, being beaten for things I couldn't understand, and being beaten worse than I'd ever seen an animal or anything else beaten, old women. You know, it was rather, I mean, it stayed with me to the point that I finally made it back to Selma to walk that bridge and to ask for forgiveness and to remember their suffering.
Mayor Brown, your remembrances on that day, Bloody Sunday.
Well, I'm from the South. I graduated from high school in a little place called Mineola, Texas. And what those thuggish folk with batons and helmets did to the people on that bridge was frankly not a surprise. Justice was regularly handed out for any alleged disobedience of somebody's order. I'd never, however, witnessed it on such a grand scale.
Here we are, Black History Month, and everybody always says, well, has anything changed? What's not changed? How would you answer that? We all know we can vote now, there's integration, we can sit at the lunch counter, but what else has changed that's really mattered?
Let's don't be so confident about we can vote now. We're losing the right to vote every single election season somewhere in this country, in some state. There is a movement to take away the vote of Black Americans.
What has changed, however, is that Dr. King inspired courage in a whole collection of people, both African Americans and non-African Americans, to be willing to make a sacrifice to try to perfect the reality of democracy and justice for everybody.
There is some friction between the quote-unquote old guard civil rights movement leaders and this new guard of demonstrators and protesters. How do you feel about this new brand of demonstration?
I think that there is no disregarding of the old civil rights way, period. And the elders should not see it as a rejection of their techniques. Techniques are techniques are techniques, and you use whichever one is effective on any given day. And fortunately for us, this younger generation seems to be of that opinion. They will use whatever means will achieve the goal and get to the end.
I heard a quote from Bobby Seale the other day. He says, what people want to forget about the Panthers is that we were organized. We didn't step out till we were organized. If we didn't have a plan, we didn't step out. And if kids heard that what we don't need are a lot of people raising their hand. So we need things that are thought out, put on some document or wherever, however kids talk to each other these days, somewhere where one could get a reference as to how you do things.
What do you think Dr. King would have said about President Barack Obama having a black president?
The one thing I think he would not be surprised by is the difficulty that Barack Obama is facing today, because it's more like the difficulties that he faced, and that is those with power using it liberally to stop you at any price. I think he'd certainly understand it.
Okay, so I get a little bit of a sense that both of you feel that what's missing is the organization, the coalescing behind where we go from here. Is that, am I accurately understanding what you're saying?
I'm unwilling to be critical of the current generation of people trying to do things. Where they permit me, I want to be of assistance and offer advice and counsel, and I encourage other Jurassic Park residents to do the same thing on the black side. But I do not criticize at all the absence of any structure within their operation. I counsel that there has to be. You've got to have some way to make sure I get bail if I get busted.
It's been a pleasure talking to Belva Davis and Mayor Willie Brown, two icons who I so admire and love. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, Reverend Jesse Jackson talks about the digital race divide on Selma to Ferguson, what has changed.